The sun beat down on the Pride Lands, baking the savanna a golden brown. Vitani, a lithe lioness with sharp eyes, patrolled the border with unwavering focus. Dust swirled around her paws as she moved, a silent guardian against any threat. She was a proud member of the Lion Guard, handpicked by Kion himself, and she took her responsibilities seriously. Every patrol, every challenge was met with fierce determination. For Vitani, the Lion Guard was more than just a duty. It was everything. It was belonging, acceptance, and purpose, things she had craved since she was a cub. She remembered the harshness of the Outlands, the constant struggle for survival, the gnawing hunger that never seemed to fade. Scar's image, a shadowy figure promising power and security, was etched in her mind. He had taken them in, given them a place, and for that, Vitani had always held him in the highest regard. She believed, without a shred of doubt, that Scar was her father. It was a truth she carried in her heart, a foundation upon which she built her life. The Pride Lands, once a distant dream, were now her home. She knew every rock, every tree, every hidden path. She understood the delicate balance of the ecosystem and the importance of protecting it. Kion had taught her about the circle of life, about respect for all creatures, and about the power of the roar. At first, it was difficult to reconcile these new values with the teachings of her past. But with each passing day, Vitani embraced her role as a protector, a force for good. Her loyalty to Kion was absolute. She admired his courage, his wisdom, and his unwavering commitment to justice. She would follow him anywhere, defend him against any foe. He had seen something in her, a potential for good that she hadn't recognized herself. He had given her a second chance, a chance to prove that she was more than just Scar's daughter. Her fellow members of the Lion Guard were her family. Although different, they were united in purpose. There was Shabaha, always eager for a challenge, Imara, calm and collected, and Kasi, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. They trusted each other implicitly, relying on their individual strengths to overcome any obstacle. They were a team, a force to be reckoned with. As Vitani surveyed the horizon, her gaze sharpened. She felt a surge of pride. This was her home, her family, her purpose. She would defend it with her life. Scar's legacy, whatever it may be, was in the past. Her future lay here, in the Pride Lands, with the Lion Guard protecting the circle of life. She was Vitani, defender of the Pride Lands, and nothing would ever change that. Or so she thought, as destiny was about to challenge her very foundation. The usual serenity of Vitani's patrol was shattered by a desperate cry. A ragged gasp, barely audible above the rustling grasses, snagged her attention. Her senses on high alert, Vitani followed the sound, her paws padding softly on the earth. She rounded a thicket of acacia trees and stopped short, her breath catching in her throat. A lioness lay sprawled on the ground, her fur matted with blood. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale a painful struggle. Wounds marred her flank and shoulder, evidence of a brutal attack. Vitani had seen the aftermath of territorial disputes before, but this was different. There was a desperation in the lioness's eyes, a plea for help that resonated deep within Vitani's soul. Hesitantly, Vitani approached, her muscles tense, ready to defend herself if necessary. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and cautious. The lioness stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open. She focused on Vitani with surprising clarity, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "Please," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper, "you must listen." Vitani knelt beside her, concern overriding her suspicion. "What happened? Who did this to you?" The lioness ignored the question, her gaze fixed on Vitani's face. He is your father," she breathed, each word a monumental effort. Vitani frowned, confused. "Scar was my father," she stated firmly. The dying lioness shook her head weakly. "No, Scarlit. Your father, his name is Ascari." The name was foreign, unfamiliar, sending a jolt of confusion through Vitani. She had never heard of him. Before Vitani could speak, The lioness continued, her voice fading. Western cliffs, hidden cave, he waits. She coughed, a spasm of pain racking her body. Tell him, Zira sends her love. Zira? Vitani's mind raced. Zira was Scar's most devoted follower, a fanatic who had clung to his ideals long after his death. What connection did she have to this lioness, to this Ascari? The lioness's breathing grew more ragged, her eyes losing focus. Vitani leaned closer, desperate to understand. Who are you? Why are you telling me this? With a final, shuddering breath, the lioness whispered, The truth must be known. And then she was still. Her eyes remained open, staring blankly at the sky. Vitani sat in stunned silence, the lioness's words echoing in her mind. Ascari? The Western Cliffs? The truth? Everything she thought she knew about her past, about her identity, was suddenly thrown into question. Scar, the only father she had ever known, the lion she had idolized, might have been lying to her all along. The sun seemed to dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the savannah. The familiar sounds of the Pride Lands, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, seemed distant and muted. Vitani felt a sense of disorientation, as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. She looked down at the lifeless form of the lioness, a stranger who had arrived only to deliver a devastating revelation. Who was she? And why had she chosen Vitani to reveal this shocking secret? A wave of nausea washed over Vitani. She stood abruptly, her legs unsteady. She needed to think, to process everything she had just heard. The Lion Guard, her duty, her responsibilities, they all seemed insignificant in the face of this newfound uncertainty. The Western Cliffs. The words echoed in her mind. She had to know the truth. She had to find this Ascari and discover what secrets he held. But to do so, she would have to abandon her post, betray the trust of her friends, and confront a past she had always believed to be settled. The choice before her was agonizing, a crossroads that would determine the course of her life. The weight of the lioness's final words pressed heavily on Vitani as she made her decision. Duty, loyalty, the Lion Guard, all faded into the background, overshadowed by the burning need to uncover the truth. Without informing Kion or her fellow guards, Vitani turned her back on her patrol route and set off towards the Western Cliffs. The journey was arduous. The cliffs loomed in the distance, jagged and imposing, their faces scarred by wind and time. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, forcing Vitani to pick her way carefully over loose rocks and crumbling ledges. Doubts gnawed at her. Was she making a mistake? Was she abandoning everything she believed in for a lie? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the image of the dying lioness, on the urgency in her voice, on the name Ascari. She owed it to herself, to the memory of the unknown lioness, to discover the truth, whatever it may be. As she neared the cliffs, the air grew cooler, the silence deeper. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the shadows cast by the towering rocks offered a welcome respite. She searched for any sign of a hidden cave, her eyes scanning the cliff face for any irregularity, any indication of an opening. Hours passed, and weariness began to set in. Just as she was about to give up, she spotted it. A narrow crevice, almost invisible behind a curtain of thorny vines. It was barely wide enough for a lion to squeeze through, but was the only possibility she had found. With renewed determination, Vitani clawed her way through the vines, ignoring the sharp thorns that tore at her fur. The crevice opened into a small, dark cave. The air inside was stale and musty, carrying the scent of dust and ancient stone. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. The cave was surprisingly spacious, its walls adorned with faded paintings depicting scenes of lions hunting, playing, and interacting with other animals. In the center of the cave, a figure sat hunched over, his back to the entrance. Vitani's heart pounded in her chest. This had to be him. Ascari. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice barely a whisper. Hello. The figure stirred, his head slowly turning. Vitani gasped. The lion was old, his mane thin and grizzled, his body bearing the marks of time and hardship. But it was his eyes that struck her the most. They were the same color as hers, a piercing shade of amber that seemed to bore into her very soul. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. Vitani swallowed hard, her throat dry. I was sent here. A lioness. She said your name was Ascari." The old lion's eyes widened slightly. "Zira sent you. She was dying. She told me to find you, that you were my father." Vitani blurted out, the words tumbling from her lips. Ascari rose slowly to his feet, his movements stiff and labored. He approached Vitani, his gaze fixed on her face. "Let me see you," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a hint of longing. He circled her slowly, examining her from every angle. He reached out a trembling paw and gently touched her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. "It is you," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "My daughter." Tears welled up in Vitani's eyes. The truth, the shocking, unbelievable truth, was staring her in the face. This old, exiled lion, hidden away in a secluded cave, was her father. Scar had lied. Everything she thought she knew about her past was a fabrication. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, leaving her reeling and disoriented. What did this mean for her future? What did it mean for her place in the Lion Guard? And what secrets did this old lion hold, hidden away in this forgotten corner of the Pride Lands? The word daughter hung in the air, a fragile bridge spanning years of separation and deceit. Vitani stared at Ascari, her mind struggling to reconcile the old, weary lion before her with the image of Scar she had carried for so long. "Mufasa exiled you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" Ascari sighed, the sound heavy with regret. He turned and slowly walked towards the back of the cave, gesturing for Vitani to follow. "It's a long story," he said, settling down on a bed of dried leaves. "A story of pride, ambition, and betrayal." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was a soldier in Mufasa's pride," he began. "A loyal one. I believed in his vision for the Pride Lands, in his commitment to the circle of life. But I also saw the flaws in his leadership. He was blinded by tradition, unwilling to adapt to changing times." Vitani listened intently, her gaze fixed on Ascari's face. She had always been taught that Mufasa was a wise and just ruler, a benevolent king who had brought peace and prosperity to the Pride Lands. To hear him criticized, especially by her own father, was unsettling. "There was a drought," Ascari continued, his voice low and somber. "The herds were dwindling, the land was parched, and the pride was struggling to survive. I proposed a solution, to venture beyond the Pride Lands, to seek out new sources of water and grazing. Mufasa refused. He said it was too dangerous, that we should trust in the natural order of things." Ascari shook his head sadly. "I disagreed. I believed that we had a responsibility to protect our pride, even if it meant breaking with tradition. I gathered a small group of lions, and we set out on our own, without Mufasa's permission." He looked at Vitani, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and regret. "We found water, a hidden oasis beyond the borders of the Pride Lands. We brought back enough to sustain the pride through the drought. But when we returned, Mufasa was furious. He accused me of insubordination, of defying his authority. He said that I had endangered the pride by venturing into unknown territory. He stripped me of my rank and banished me from the Pride Lands." Vitani's mind reeled. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mufasa, the noble king, had exiled her father for trying to save the pride? It didn't make sense. Scar was there, Ascari said, his voice hardening. He saw an opportunity. He whispered in Mufasa's ear, poisoning his mind against me. He claimed that I was ambitious, that I was plotting to overthrow him. Mufasa believed him. Scar always wanted to be king. Vitani realized, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. He used your exile to gain favor with Mufasa. Ascari nodded grimly. He was always jealous of Mufasa, of his power, of his position. He saw me as a threat, someone who could challenge his claim to the throne. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the entrance of the cave. I wandered the Outlands for years, alone and forgotten. I heard rumors of Mufasa's death, of Scar's rise to power. I knew that Scar was responsible, that he had finally achieved his ambition. But I could do nothing, Ascari said, his voice filled with despair. I was an exile, powerless to stop him. I could only watch as the Pride Lands fell into darkness. Vitani reached out and gently touched her father's paw. I'm here now, she said, her voice filled with determination. I'm a member of the Lion Guard. I can help you. Ascari looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. Can you? He asked. Or will you choose to believe the lies you've been told all your life? The weight of his words settled upon Vitani, heavy and inescapable. She was torn between her loyalty to the Lion Guard and her newfound connection to her father. The choice before her was clear: accept the pride she was raised to hate, or embrace a truth that could fracture her place in the Lion Guard forever. Night fell over the Pride Lands, casting long shadows across the savannah. In the hidden cave, Ascari continued his story, weaving a tapestry of the past that challenged everything Vitani had ever believed. He spoke of injustice, not just his own, but of other lions who had dared to question Mufasa's authority. Lions who had been punished for speaking their minds, for offering alternative solutions, for simply being different. He described a pride that was not always as harmonious as the stories portrayed, a society where tradition often trumped compassion. Mufasa was a strong king, Ascari conceded, but he was also a rigid one. He believed in the circle of life, but he often failed to see the individual lives within it. He valued loyalty above all else, and he was quick to punish those who he perceived as disloyal. He told Vitani of the wars that had plagued the Pride Lands before Mufasa's reign, wars that had been fought over territory and resources, wars that had claimed the lives of countless lions, leaving scars that ran deep within the pride. He spoke of the sacrifices that had been made to secure the Pride Lands, of the compromises that had been necessary to maintain peace. The Pride Lands were not always a paradise, Ascari explained. They were forged in blood and conflict. Mufasa inherited a kingdom that was fractured and divided. He brought order, but he also suppressed dissent. Then his voice softened. He spoke of lost love. He told Vitani about her mother, a beautiful lioness named Sarabi, not the Sarabi who was Mufasa's queen, but another lioness with the same name. She was a fierce warrior, a skilled hunter, and a loyal friend. She had been Ascari's mate, his soulmate, the love of his life. We were inseparable, Ascari said, his eyes gleaming with fond remembrance. We hunted together, we played together, we dreamed together. We were going to have a family, build a life together in the Pride Lands. But their happiness was short-lived. When Ascari was exiled, Sarabi was forced to choose between her loyalty to him and her duty to the pride. She chose the pride, remaining in the Pride Lands while Ascari wandered alone in the Outlands. It broke my heart, Ascari confessed, but I understood her decision. She had a responsibility to the pride, to her family. I couldn't ask her to abandon everything for me. He never saw her again. He heard rumors that she had died, but he never knew for sure. The thought of her, lost and alone, haunted him for years. As Ascari spoke, Vitani began to see Scar in a new light. Not as the strong, decisive leader she had idolized as a cub, but as a manipulative opportunist who had seized power through deceit and treachery. She saw how he had preyed on Mufasa's insecurities, how he had exploited the divisions within the pride to further his own ambitions. She realized that Scar had not been a father to her, but a user. He had used her, along with the other cubs in the Outlands, as pawns in his game of power. He had filled their heads with lies and hatred, turning them into loyal soldiers who would follow him blindly into battle. The stories Ascari told were not just about the past, they were about the present. They were about the choices she faced, the path she would choose to follow. Would she continue to believe the lies she had been told, or would she embrace the truth, even if it meant betraying everything she had ever known? The weight of her decision grew heavier with each passing moment. She was trapped between two worlds, two loyalties, two fathers. The future of the Pride Lands and her own destiny hung in the balance. The first rays of dawn crept into the cave, painting the walls with a soft, golden light. Vitani sat in silence, the weight of Ascari's stories pressing down on her. The world she thought she knew, the history she had been taught, was crumbling around her. Seeds of doubt had been sown, and they were taking root, twisting and contorting her perception of reality. She thought back to her cubhood in the Outlands, to the harshness of their existence, to the unwavering loyalty Scar demanded. She remembered the stories he told about Mufasa, portraying him as a weak and indecisive leader, a tyrant who oppressed the Outlanders and hoarded the resources of the Pride Lands. Now, she wondered if those stories were true, or were they just another layer of Scar's deception, designed to manipulate her and the other cubs into hating Mufasa and the Pride Lands. She thought of Kion, of his unwavering commitment to justice, of his belief in the circle of life. He had welcomed her into the Lion Guard, given her a second chance, shown her the true meaning of compassion and responsibility. Could she betray his trust? Could she turn her back on the Pride Lands after all he had done for her? But then she looked at Ascari, at the pain etched on his face, at the years of suffering he had endured. He had been exiled for trying to do what was right, for daring to challenge Mufasa's authority. He had lost everything: his home, his mate, his place in the Pride. Didn't he deserve justice? Didn't she have a responsibility to help him reclaim what had been taken from him? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the Pride Lands were not as perfect as she had believed. She had seen glimpses of inequality, of prejudice, of the old traditions that still held sway. She had heard whispers of discontent, of lions who felt marginalized and forgotten. Perhaps Mufasa had not been a tyrant, but he had certainly been flawed. He had made mistakes, he had shown favoritism, he had allowed injustice to fester within his kingdom. And Scar had exploited those flaws, twisting them to his own advantage. Vitani began to question everything she had been taught about the circle of life. Was it really a natural order, or was it just a system that perpetuated inequality and oppression? Was it right for the strong to rule over the weak, for the rich to exploit the poor? She had always believed that the Lion Guard was meant to protect the circle of life, to maintain the balance of nature. But what if the circle of life was itself unjust? What if it was a system that needed to be challenged, to be reformed? The questions swirled in her mind, creating a storm of confusion and doubt. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know who to trust. The only thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't go on living a lie. She had to find the truth, whatever it may be, and she had to make a choice, even if it meant sacrificing everything she held dear. She looked at Ascari, his eyes filled with hope and expectation. He was waiting for her to make a decision, to choose between him and the Lion Guard, between the past and the future. And she knew, deep down, that her decision would not only determine her own fate, but the fate of the Pride Lands as well. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and the harvest was about to begin. The internal conflict raged within Vitani like a wildfire, consuming her thoughts and emotions. The Lion Guard, once her anchor, now felt like a chain, binding her to a past she was no longer sure she believed in. Kion's face, etched with trust and admiration, haunted her. How could she face him, knowing she was harboring secrets, questioning the very foundation of their bond? She remembered the day Kion had offered her a place in the Lion Guard. She had been skeptical, wary of his motives. She had expected judgment, condemnation for her past association with Scar. Instead, she had found acceptance, a chance to prove herself worthy of redemption. He had seen something in her, a spark of good that she herself had almost extinguished. Now, she felt like she was betraying his faith, shattering the image he had of her. She imagined his disappointment, his hurt, his confusion. Could she bear to inflict such pain on someone who had shown her so much kindness? But then she looked at Ascari, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for justice. He had been wronged, betrayed, stripped of everything he held dear. He had spent years in exile, suffering in silence, waiting for someone to believe him, to help him reclaim his rightful place. He was her father, a part of her she had never known. She saw her own strength, her own determination, reflected in his eyes. She felt a deep connection to him, a bond that transcended years of separation and deceit. How could she abandon him, knowing he had suffered so much? How could she turn her back on her own family? The weight of her decision was crushing. She felt like she was being torn in two, her heart and mind pulling her in opposite directions. She longed for guidance, for someone to tell her what to do, but she knew that the choice was hers alone. She thought about the other members of the Lion Guard, Shabaha, Imara, Kasi. They were her friends, her comrades, her family. They trusted her, they relied on her, they depended on her to protect the Pride Lands. Could she abandon them in their time of need? Could she risk jeopardizing the safety of the Pride Lands for her own personal vendetta? But then she remembered the injustices Askari had described, the lions who had been silenced, the traditions that perpetuated inequality. The Pride Lands were not as perfect as they seemed. There were shadows lurking beneath the surface, secrets hidden from view. Perhaps she had a responsibility to expose those secrets, to challenge the status quo, to fight for a more just and equitable society. Perhaps her loyalty to the Lion Guard should extend beyond the borders of the Pride Lands, to encompass all those who had been wronged, all those who had been oppressed. The internal conflict intensified, blurring the lines between right and wrong, between good and evil. She felt like she was standing on a precipice, about to plunge into an abyss of uncertainty. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the conflicting voices in her head. She focused on her breath, trying to find a sense of calm, a moment of clarity. She knew that she couldn't stay in the cave forever. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it soon. The fate of the Pride Lands and her own destiny depended on it. She took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and looked at Askari. "I need time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think, to sort things out." Askari nodded, his expression understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But remember, the truth cannot be hidden forever. Sooner or later, it will come to light." As if orchestrated by fate, a crisis arose that forced Vitani to confront her conflicting loyalties head-on. While Vitani was still grappling with her decision, Askari revealed that he had overheard a group of hyenas plotting an attack on the Pride Lands. The hyenas, led by a particularly vicious female named Jasairi, no relation to the Jasairi Vitani knew, were driven by starvation and desperation, pushed to the brink by the dwindling resources in the Outlands. They planned to raid the Pride Lands' grazing grounds, stealing food and water to survive. Askari, despite his age and weakened condition, felt a responsibility to warn the Pride Lands. He believed that even after his exile, he still had a duty to protect the land he once called home. However, he was too weak to travel, and he feared that if he were seen near the Pride Lands, he would be immediately attacked. He turned to Vitani, his eyes pleading. "You must warn them," he said. "You must tell Kion about the hyenas. They will attack at dawn." Vitani's heart sank. This was the test she had been dreading. She knew that if she alerted the Lion Guard, they would be ready for the hyenas, and the Pride Lands would be safe. But doing so would mean betraying Askari's trust, reaffirming her loyalty to the Pride Lands, and potentially jeopardizing her relationship with her father forever. On the other hand, if she helped Askari, if she somehow found a way to aid the hyenas in finding a sustainable source of food in the Outlands, she could prevent the attack altogether. She could prove to Askari that she was on his side, that she believed in his vision of a more just and equitable society. But doing so would mean abandoning her duty to the Lion Guard, risking the safety of the Pride Lands, and potentially being branded a traitor. She considered trying to do both, to warn the Lion Guard while simultaneously attempting to negotiate with the hyenas. But she knew that such a delicate balancing act would be impossible. She would inevitably be forced to choose, to commit to one side or the other. She paced back and forth in the cave, her mind racing. The weight of her decision was almost unbearable. She looked at Ascari, his face etched with anxiety. He was depending on her, trusting her to do what was right. Suddenly, an idea sparked in her mind. What if she could convince Kion to help the hyenas? What if she could persuade him to see that the hyenas were not inherently evil, but simply desperate? What if she could broker a peace agreement between the Pride Lands and the Outlands, ensuring the survival of both? It was a long shot, but it was the only way she could see to reconcile her conflicting loyalties. It would require all her courage, all her persuasion, and all her faith in Kion's compassion. She took a deep breath and turned to Ascari. "I have a plan," she said, her voice filled with determination. "But it's risky. It depends on Kion's willingness to listen." Ascari looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "What is it?" he asked. Vitani explained her plan, outlining the steps she would take to try to avert the crisis. Ascari listened intently, his expression growing more hopeful with each passing moment. "It's a long shot," he said when she had finished, "but it's worth a try. I trust you, Vitani. I believe in you." Vitani smiled, a surge of confidence coursing through her veins. She was still torn, still uncertain, but she knew that she had to try. She had to do everything in her power to prevent the attack, to protect both the Pride Lands and the Outlands, and to honor her loyalty to both the Lion Guard and her father. The dawn was approaching, and the test of her loyalty was about to begin. With the first hint of dawn painting the sky, Vitani raced towards the Pride Lands, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She knew that every second counted, that the fate of the Pride Lands and the Outlands rested on her shoulders. She found Kion near Pride Rock, preparing for his morning patrol. He greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes filled with genuine affection. "Vitani, what are you doing here? I thought you were patrolling the western border." Vitani took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to say. "Kion, I need to talk to you. It's important." She recounted the events of the past day, telling him about the dying lioness, Ascari, and the hyena attack. She explained her plan to broker a peace agreement, to convince him to help the hyenas find a sustainable source of food in the Outlands. Kion listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When she had finished, he was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in thought. "This is a lot to take in, Vitani," he said finally. "I need time to process everything you've told me." "There's no time, Kion," Vitani pleaded. "The hyenas will attack at dawn. We have to act now." Kion sighed. "I understand, but I can't just blindly trust a hyena attack. We need proof." Vitani nodded. "I know. That's why I'm asking you to come with me. We can go to the Outlands, talk to the hyenas, and see for ourselves what's happening." Kion hesitated, his gaze flickering towards Pride Rock. He knew that his duty was to protect the Pride Lands, to ensure the safety of his pride. But he also knew that Vitani was telling the truth, that she genuinely believed in her plan. "All right," he said finally, "I'll go with you. But if I see any sign of treachery, any hint that the hyenas are planning to harm the Pride Lands, I'm turning back." Vitani smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Kion," she said. "I won't let you down." Together, they raced towards the Outlands, their paws pounding on the earth. As they neared the border, they could hear the distant sounds of snarling and growling. The hyenas were preparing for their attack. Vitani led Kion to the hyenas' territory, where they were met by Jasairi and her pack. Jasairi, a lean and fierce hyena, eyed them suspiciously. "What do you want?" she snarled. "Why have you come to the Outlands?" Vitani stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "We've come to talk," she said. "We know about your plan to attack the Pride Lands. We want to help you find another way." Jasairi scoffed. "Help us? Why would you do that? You're from the Pride Lands. You're our enemies." "We don't have to be enemies," Vitani said. "We can work together. We can find a way for both the Pride Lands and the Outlands to thrive." She explained her plan to Jasairi, outlining the steps they could take to find a sustainable source of food in the Outlands. Jasairi listened intently, her expression slowly softening. Kion remained silent, watching the interaction with a wary eye. He could see the desperation in the hyena's eyes, the hunger that gnawed at their bellies. He began to realize that Vitani was right, that they were not inherently evil, but simply desperate. After a long and tense negotiation, Jacairi agreed to give Vitani's plan a chance. She would call off the attack, and she would work with Vitani and Kion to find a solution to their food shortage. Vitani had done it. She had brokered a peace agreement, averted a war, and honored her loyalty to both the Lion Guard and her father. But her decision had come at a cost. When Kion returned to the Pride Lands, he was met with suspicion and distrust. The other members of the Lion Guard, and many of the lions in the Pride, questioned his decision to trust the hyenas. They accused him of being weak, of being naive, of putting the Pride Lands at risk. Vitani stood by Kion's side, defending his actions and reaffirming her belief in his vision of peace and cooperation. But she knew that their relationship had been changed forever. The trust that had once existed between them had been fractured, and it would take a long time to heal. Her decision had saved the Pride Lands, but had also cost her dearly. She had chosen to believe in her father, to fight for justice, to challenge the status quo. And in doing so, she had risked everything she held dear. The days that followed were filled with both hope and uncertainty. Vitani and Kion worked tirelessly to implement their plan, venturing into the Outlands to teach the hyenas sustainable hunting techniques and helping them to find new sources of food and water. They faced resistance from both sides, from lions who distrusted the hyenas and from hyenas who distrusted the lions. But they persevered, driven by their shared vision of peace and cooperation. Slowly but surely, their efforts began to bear fruit. The hyenas learned to hunt more efficiently, and the Pride Lands began to share some of their resources with the Outlands. The tension between the two groups lessened, and a fragile truce began to take hold. However, the rift between Vitani and the other members of the Lion Guard remained. They couldn't understand her decision to side with the hyenas, to risk the safety of the Pride Lands for the sake of a group they had always considered to be enemies. They felt betrayed, abandoned, and resentful. Shabaha, Imara, and Kasi, once her closest friends, now treated her with cold politeness. They avoided her gaze, whispered behind her back, and excluded her from their activities. Vitani tried to explain her actions to